Imagine this, your kids resilient and ready to tackle life's curveballs, all while having fun and learning through play. Sounds like a dream, right? I'm Jodie Sweetin, your host for Awkward Conversations, where each week we look to give parents practical advice on how to raise happy, healthy, substance-free kids who are empowered to make smart choices. And today we're discussing building resilience and coping skills in our kids. This episode is about giving your children the tools they need to navigate life's challenges with confidence and joy. We've got two fantastic guests joining us to share their wisdom and experiences. You might know our first guest from The Big Bang Theory, Blossom, or as the host of Jeopardy! But did you also know that she is an incredible neuroscientist?
Ooh, is it Mayim Bialik?
Yes, it is, Amy, but you didn't phrase it as a question, so no points for you. Mayim is here to talk about all the incredible things she does as a mom to foster resilience and coping skills in her kids. Mayim, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I love awkward conversations.
It's what we're really good at here. Mayim, how do you balance your professional insights with your personal parenting style?
It's a good question, and I have to think about the timing because I started studying science before I got pregnant, before I became a mom. I had my first son in grad school, and then I took my doctoral hood pregnant with my second. So I was learning about neurodevelopment as I was growing humans, which is, again, I think really good timing. And one of the things that is true is that primates know how to play. We are primates. Mm-hmm. If we look at how other primates live and nurture, you see that play is a spontaneous generation of interaction that is critically important. It's very hard to separate that as humans from the social impacts of what we're told we should do with our kids, what we're told that they should play with, what milestones they should hit. And I think it's really important to point out, like, the notion that like a toddler should be able to pronounce the or to recite the alphabet. It's adorable. Is it as useful as other forms of play? Likely not. Our family practiced the Waldorf philosophy and raised our kids like that, which is like no screens and blah, blah, no electronics, and more of an emphasis on children playing in the first 7 years of life, being in their body, learning about right and wrong through fairy tales, through narrative, through myth, things like that, with a strong emphasis in trying to maintain a sense of wonder about the world, which is really what play is supposed to foster, no matter what kind of primate you are.
You're watching Awkward Conversations Season 4.
And we have Dr. Peter Gray, a leading expert in child psychology and the author of Free to Learn. Dr. Gray will explain why play is a crucial part of developing our kids' cognitive and emotional well-being. He'll talk to us about how play helps build resilience, form positive peer relationships, and promote healthy lifestyles that are critical tools in preventing substance misuse. Welcome to the show, Dr. Gray.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited about this topic. I would love to hear from Dr. Gray. Can you explain some of the key elements that we've been talking about, the key elements of play that make it so crucial for childhood development, some of the things that Mayim had touched on?
Children are biologically designed to develop through play. Through most of human history, we didn't have schools. We didn't have the idea that children are deliberately taught. Yet we've had culture for as long as we've been human beings. Children acquire the culture. Children learn what they need to know. Children practice the skills they need to know. And how do they do it? They do it through play. They've always done it through play. We are living at a time and place when children are more deprived of play than they've ever been before. This is a tragic experiment. What happens if we take play away from children? And we are seeing the consequences. We're seeing record levels of anxiety, depression, even suicide among teenagers. And I'm absolutely convinced that this relates to the fact that we've been taking the method by which children acquire resilience, learn the skills that they need to deal with the bumps in the road of life. And we've also taken away the activities that in the immediate sense make children most happy. And then we're surprised that we see such high levels of unhappiness, depression, and anxiety. So let me answer more specifically your question. What is it about play that makes it so valuable? So the first characteristic of play, one that adults too often forget or never understood, is that play is initiated and controlled by the players, not by some authority figure outside of the play. So one of the things that children learn, or in fact more than one of the things they learn from play right off from the definition, is how to initiate their own activity, how to decide what to do. and how to control what they're doing. Now, most play among children, when they have their preferences, is social, play with other children. So when children are playing with other children, they have to decide together what they're doing and how they're doing it, which means they have to negotiate. They have to compromise. I want to do this. You want to do that. What do we both want to do? Maybe I'm a bit of a bully and I'm trying to tell you what to do. But if you are a self-respecting child, you'll walk away from me and say, I'm not going to play with you. When we adults tell them what to do, it's no longer play. And we're also taking away this learning opportunity for them to learn how to take initiative, to figure out what to do and control their activities. Second characteristic of play, I think this is what leads so many people, unfortunately, to think of play as a waste of time, is that play is something that you're not doing for some reward outside of itself. You're not doing it for an A on report card. You're not doing it for praise. You're just doing it because you want to do it. In our materialistic society, we tend to think, what a waste of time if you're doing something that you're not getting something for. But think about that. In a sense, what is the purpose of life? If not to do what you want to do, if not to have fun? What's even the point of material rewards if it doesn't have to do with having fun?
I think one of the things that Dr. Gray was also pointing to is we are the most overmanaged generation is what these kids are, right? And they're supposed to have all the resources and they have all the vocabulary. The pop psychology terms that come out of my teenagers,
Right, yeah.
they have this enormous vocabulary. But when it comes down to it, we have a very lonely generation.
Yes.
And a tremendous component, and maybe Dr. Gray can speak to this, is the notion of social media and even gaming, which my younger one really likes gaming. While those may involve talking about things with other people, it's very different than the kind of interaction that comes when children are given space to interact and play together. And that doesn't mean that every kid wants to play the same.
Right.
My younger one is happy for other people to decide things when in
Right.
a group, right? So there's some variability, but I think that's what I heard Dr. Gray kind of alluding to is like when you have loneliness, when you have isolation, for me as the parent of teenagers, that's the breeding ground for find something that makes it better.
Right.
Find something that makes me not feel what I'm feeling, which is why grown-ups drink and
Right.
smoke pot and do all the things that grown-ups do. But Dr. Gray is pointing to a really significant phenomenon that when you keep having a reduction in the ability to expand on all of the things that happen when children are allowed to
Right.
engage in play, I absolutely feel like that leaves this hole that can be filled with the things that also our culture tells us makes it better. Look at beer ads. Like, I want to live that life.
Right,
you know?
right, yeah, exactly. And I think also, Dr. Gray, do you think that COVID also really had a huge effect on play and kids going out and interacting? We had almost a year-long pause.
Play was outlawed.
Play was outlawed. You
COVID.
you couldn't go in groups and do all of the things that kids really need to do. And I just wonder if you saw any real spike after COVID.
There's a lot of myths about what happened in COVID. We did a large study during the school lockdown. In half the surveys, we asked the questions of the parents, and in half the surveys, the questions were asked of the kids. What we found is that the kids were doing better during COVID lockdown than they were before. When we asked, are you more anxious or less anxious than before schools closed down, the great majority said less anxious. The kids said that, and the parents said the kids were less anxious. When we asked about activities, we found that the kids were playing when they didn't have time to play before because they were being pushed into all kinds of other activities. They were freed from all these activities. Now suddenly they had time. And what a lot of kids said was in response to our questions, first I was bored, but then I started to do this and I started to do that. Bicycles sold out in the state of Massachusetts because kids were learning to ride bicycles for the first time. One of the questions we asked of parents is, do you have more or fewer conflicts with your child now during this period than you did before? And the great majority said fewer conflicts. They were proud of their children, how well their children adapted to this period of time. And a lot of parents discovered, hey, it works out pretty well to not have my child constantly involved in adult-directed, imposed activities. It's nice that my child has some time to do the things my child wants to do. And the children were not as isolated as we might think because thank goodness they had the internet. They connected with one another on the internet. They played. Many kids learned how to use Zoom who had never used it before, so they could interact with their friends. Video games are multiplayer, it's real play, and it's not like we took something away from them because we weren't letting them outdoors to play before.
It's
True,
almost like,
that's very true.
Almost like a silver lining of COVID is that maybe some families and children got to rediscover the idea of play.
One thing I wanted to say is that he touched on resiliency and that how important play is in building that type of resiliency. And one of the things that was talked a lot about in COVID and during those things was teaching children that type of resiliency, that like sometimes things like this happen, how do we move forward and get on? And how play really dovetails in with that, about teaching kids like, oh, sometimes you're not going to agree with everyone you're playing with, so you've got to stop and talk and figure things out. Oh, sometimes things aren't going to work out or you lose the game or whatever. Those types of resiliencies helps keep the brain going, oh, things don't always work out a certain way. I have to adjust and move. You're watching Awkward Conversations Season 4.
Saving lives means staying informed. Knowing the dangers of using fake prescription pills can help those you care about and keep our community safe. As a parent, educator, neighbor, or friend, we all play a role in building safe and healthy futures for ourselves and our loved ones. Do your part to take the first step today. Visit GetSmartAboutDrugs.com to access education, prevention, and treatment resources. Fake prescription pills laced with fentanyl are deadly. Be their protector. Be informed. Visit GetSmartAboutDrugs.com.
Welcome back to Awkward Conversations Season 4.
If I could just put a very old person request in to talk about board games.
Yes!
I had a little bit of a revival. I don't know if it was related to COVID. This is something that both my kid's dad and we both grew up with board games, and it was a thing. But when my kids were little, we had these cooperative board games, they're called. Dr. Gray, I'm sure you're familiar with these. They're games where there's not necessarily a clear winner. It's a group, basically a group activity, and there's a very small company that they're called cooperative board games. And it's interesting because it engages all of the resources that are involved, meaning you have to talk together, you have to work together, but it's not oriented towards this notion of winning, losing, because sometimes sensitive children and adults have a hard time with that. But I think some of those, when people ask me, both as a parent and also as someone trained in science, what are the things, like the best thing to do is to interact face to face with children. That's true for infants. And honestly, it doesn't really change a lot. And of course, you want them to have independent lives and independent social identity. But play is the place where children start understanding right and wrong. It's where they understand narrative. And a lot of those cultural things get worked out through play. When you look at how animals play, they play to build strength. They play to learn strategy. Wrestling, we're a martial arts family, so like that kind of activity, it's healthy. It's healthy to have human interaction. It's healthy to have touch in safe and comfortable ways.
Right.
So I just wanted to give a shout out for a lot of traditional old school things.
Yeah.
And I have to force my kids, because if they have a phone, everything else feels less than.
I have to force myself.
Yeah, everything else feels like I'm pulling you away. We played dominoes the other night just to sit and just to take a break where we're not staring into screens. We're looking at each other. We're talking strategy. We're laughing. Those are important human interactions.
I just recently went out with friends, with some of my crew that I work with, and we went to some it was like laser tag, but it was all these different games and all this stuff. We were children. We were 10, 11 years old again, screaming, yelling, running, playing, and we all left so happy.
Feeling lighter,
and I was
I'm
like,
sure.
oh, yeah, adults need to play too.
Yeah. And model for children how to be able to play from the start, but also that we can still do that. I think that we've talked about there's challenges like this phenomenon of not introducing play as much wouldn't happen without some of those challenges. Dr. Gray, what do you see as some of the challenges to families facilitating play in their child's life?
What's really lacking is the opportunity for children to play with other children away from adults. We have adults around children all the time. There's nothing wrong with family play and parent-child play, but it doesn't take the place of children playing with peers, with other children away from adults, because that's where children are learning how to negotiate with peers, learning how to get along with people who might be bullying them a little bit. What do you do about this? Learning how to solve their own problems. This is the kind of play that we need to bring back to children somehow, because this is where they develop resilience. This is where they learn, I can take charge. I can solve problems. I don't need some authority figure all the time to be around me. And as children grow older, they need more and more of that kind of independence away from adults. We are allowing teenagers less independence, and this is true, than I had when I was 6 years old. We are always talking about what can adults do. What adults need to do is step back, get away, let your kids get away from you for a while. And that's hard to do in our world today. And that's the problem that needs to be solved.
It's almost like moving from helicopter parenting to like lifeguard parenting, like in some ways.
Yeah.
Like being a present, being there, being available, being able to, make sure that your child is safe,
Right.
but taking a step back and just allowing it to happen, just letting life
I used to tell my kids, unless someone's bleeding or in danger, work it out. You'll figure it out. You guys might argue, but this is, you got to figure it out. And you have an incredible organization called Let Grow. And I'd love to hear a little bit about what that organization does and how it helps promote play in schools and communities.
Let Grow is an organization that Lenore Skenazy, who wrote the book Free Range Kids, and I and a couple of other people founded a few years ago. And we're working with schools, with communities, with individual parents to bring more freedom and free play, more independent activity into children's lives. So one of the things we do in working with schools is to bring a program that the schools call Play Club to the school, which is a period, typically an hour, either before school or after school. And some schools are making it now more than an hour, I'm glad to see. Free play, where all the kids in the school, these are usually elementary schools, so kindergarten through 5th grade, all playing together. They're not segregated by age. They're playing together. And the only rule is don't hurt anybody and you have to stay on campus. And this is where the lifeguard analogy comes in. When I instruct the principals of the school how to instruct the teachers who are monitoring Play Club, I say, while you're monitoring Play Club, you are not a teacher. You are like a lifeguard on an ocean beach. You're just there if you think that there's truly some emergency. And even then, I suggest count to 10, unless you think it's more dire than that. Count to 10, because chances are the kids will solve the problem themselves. And that's the purpose of play, is for kids, one of the major purposes of play, that for kids to learn how to solve problems themselves. It's so tempting for adults to step in and solve. We want to solve our kids' problems. We don't like to see them have a problem. But we are not doing them a favor when we step in to solve the problem. It's hard for parents not to. So that's why parents shouldn't even be there. The teacher who's acting like the lifeguard is there, and in case something. Now, what I'm hearing, which does not surprise me, is they almost never have to step in. The kids do solve their problems. And the teachers are often amazed at how well they solve their problems. Kids are designed to do this. And this especially works in this age-mixed interaction, because sometimes you'll get a couple of little kids, a couple of 5-year-olds, they'll get into a little squabble. And what over and over is maybe a 10-year-old comes over and says, hey, what's going on here? And that is such a better learning experience for everybody than if an adult went over and said, what's going on here? Because the adult is an authority figure, and it's almost like punishment, and it's a different thing from when this amazing 10-year-old who you're looking up to is coming over and saying, hey, what's going on here? And is trying to, and you want to emulate this 10-year-old. So this has been very successful. It creates a much better attitude about school. Every school that's adopted it, as far as I know, has been very pleased with it. I wish that this were extended. I think we could go a long distance to solving the play problem if every school stayed open after school for free play between the hours when school ended and when parents are home from work, from 2:30 in the afternoon or 5 in the afternoon until 5:30 or so. Free play using the entire school facilities. That would be a significant amount of play, and it would improve everybody's attitude about school, as well as the kids would make friends. They would be less lonely. They would get to know one another so that they wanted to get together outside of the school context as well. So this is one of the programs we've done. There are other programs too. I unfortunately have to leave now.
Yes, we were about to say thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Gray. We just have learned so much, and the power of play is really incredible. I would love to continue this conversation as parents, as people who work with families and kids, about the different ways that we have seen play in our families or our kids and what it's done for them as far as emotional regulation, social skills, self-esteem. I know I was always, I think it's hard for parents these days because we do feel judged if you are the lifeguard parent, where you're like, look, they're going to be okay. Just let them do their thing. So many parents will look at you as though you're just letting your children go, that it's like Lord of the Flies. And I think it sounds like there's a happy medium before we quite get to Lord of the Flies land, but where kids are doing what they want to do, self-directed activity. And your kids are older, but
yeah, I mean, my kids were also homeschooled until high school. My older son went to high school in 11th grade and my younger in 10th. So we also had a lot more time with our kids than people do, and still felt it was incredibly important to not be our child's only playmate. So that's something. And there are elaborate homeschool ways that people foster play and things like that. Actually, they have a lot of time for play, which is great. One of the reasons people like homeschooling. But I will say that, like, everything Dr. Gray was talking about, these are the investments that we're making. And it's really hard because as parents, you want to know, like, this thing I did, it worked right away. Like, I taught them to do this and they did it and they're happy and everybody's happy. And this is more like you're making an investment. So it's a real kind of pivot in the organization of our thinking. And there's a parenting philosophy called RIE, R-I-E, it stands for Resources for Infant Educators, which is an odd name. But the RIE philosophy, which we were taught when our kids were toddlers, is children mostly figure things out if left to their own devices, meaning a little bit of them learning to navigate is, in theory, supposed to build resilience, and it's supposed to make them feel like they are autonomous creatures. Because in our society, it's true. People are always inserting themselves into every situation, even as adults. These are investments that, we're being told to keep making in our kids. And it feels ridiculous that we have to talk about this. Here's why people should play. It seems because for us, it's like you had no choice, right? Meaning,
that's yeah, exactly. You went outside and that was it.
But the fact that, and look, I get intimidated by my teenagers because they'll be like, every generation has the thing that the parents don't understand. And I'm like, no, but I think this is different.
I think we're doing some
science.
Damage.
There's like science saying that you should not stare at that screen for 8 hours in a day. I promise. Of course, there's some good things, but the fact that we have to, it's like with meditation. For thousands of years, Eastern traditions have been like, duh. And we're like, here's the science, and I'll put you in a scanner and show you why you should not constantly be anxious and biting your nails. And here's something that can help that's free.
I think, too, I'd love to just really explain what resiliency is. Resiliency is the ability to face problems, challenges, things that aren't going your way, from the I failed a test to my parents are getting divorced. The idea of resiliency is building those things so that kids can walk through painful emotional things or conflicts and know that there will be another side to it, that it will get.
That's building ego. And you can probably speak to this. It's building a healthy sense of ego. The reason that I'm taking it to the ego level is when someone offers you drugs, right? You want to be able to say, here's what I know about myself. Here's what I don't know about myself. Or I know that this is something that doesn't feel right, but I can't put my finger on it. Peer pressure. That's what it is. And as adults, we also have peer pressure.
I talk with the young people I work with quite often about this idea of when hard things come up, like having the confidence or the belief in yourself to get through those things is like the number one positive predictor, I think, in many ways. And I think the other thing that you were talking about that I was thinking of is, as we think about parents who are listening to the podcast, there's such an opportunity with all of this to evaluate your own kind of responses and your own resiliency and your own anxiety. And as you're thinking about potentially reinserting play into the lives of your children or this independence into the lives of your children, how can you model and how can you start developing those skills to be able to show them a pathway forward?
I also think unscheduled time is so key. And I know I'm guilty of it. My life is constantly scheduled back to back. And so then by default, our kids are too, because we've got 17 places to be. So we need to make sure that they're taken care of, and we've lost that ability to just sit in your room for an afternoon and flip through a magazine or make a collage. Do things
that
that are
scrolling, like not
that
sitting in
isn't
your room
scrolling,
for 3
right?
hours
That
scrolling.
is just being with yourself, and again, building that ego, building that self-knowledge, those things that a screen is designed to pull us away from, that all of those things are found in play and connection with other humans.
And I think also, even though my kids are older, I hear numerous times, Mama, put your phone down.
I heard all the
Mama,
time. Yep.
Mama, come get in the pool with us. Or
Yeah.
Mama, we're at the beach. Why are you on your phone? Why are you on your phone is like their favorite expression, and they're not wrong. But
Right.
I think that's also the thing is like we need to learn. My son taught me that teenagers, when they get together, they build a phone stack on the table. Everybody's
Oh, right,
phones.
and they just, yeah.
So like we've started doing that. Like we're at the table.
Yeah.
We're out. Like everybody's phone here. And if you
Yeah.
want to show me something, you can show me it after. But just that notion of like adults in a capitalistic society, we're not taught to play.
Right.
So that's an opportunity also. Like
Right.
who knew that we had to actually model it for our kids because
Yeah.
they would be a part of a generation that doesn't know how
Right.
to play. But it helps when we say, oh, we're here, we're gonna take a walk,
Yeah.
and everybody's gonna put their phones down, and also a lot of stuff that Dr. Gray was talking about, I can't help but think like there's a level of privileged conversation.
Absolutely. I always like to address that
yeah,
too,
and
but
like
yeah.
for many families, like I'm thinking of a single mom like trying to support a bunch
Right.
of kids and living in poverty, or
Right.
it's not that easy to be like, go outside, have a
Right.
great time. A lot of kids grow up in not safe environments.
Right.
It is
Places you
safer
can't
to
play
be
outside.
correct. So I think also, but there's this notion of like, how do we create play? And I know Dr. Gray
Right.
wants me not playing with my children, but I'm saying these
Right.
are often the only times that we're with our
Right.
kids. That's our only snapshot with them.
or-
What do you want that time to look like?
Or like he talked about some of those programs that are after school programs and building and being as parents and trying to figure out places. One of the things that I think I see from my kids all the time is there's nowhere for them to just go and hang out. Like they go to the mall, but then
That's where
you
the
know,
drugs are.
Not even the drugs. I've been to the mall in the afternoon with 300 middle schoolers there. Nobody wants to be there then, but where do they go? They don't. And so finding those things, those outlets for them, those places to play. I find that if I just sit in the living room with a book, with a crossword puzzle, my kids weirdly will come out to get something from the kitchen, and then they're just, oh. And they'll just sit on the couch and do something with me or look at a magazine or do, you know,
Like you're not
it's
going to lecture me because you're busy.
right. But again, it's that being like, I'm just there doing an activity, building a puzzle. Hey, you want to come help me with this? Doing something on my own and modeling for them. There's other things to do to keep yourself busy that aren't phone or screen related.
Yeah.
And
So
that's super helpful.
that piece of play, I think, is the piece that we've talked about around building like the resilience side of things. And then I think the other side of it is around building like social networks, but also like so many kids, I think, as Dr. Ray talked to in the very beginning, social anxiety is at an all-time peak for young people. So having a group of people who are like your people.
And old people.
Yeah, yeah. And all,
And
all
us,
of us
yeah.
alike. And I think, though, for you to be able to have a group of people who are like your people, but then also to be able to just easily interact socially
Right.
with strangers or new people, substance use is bred in isolation. So
Right.
this is a huge way to combat or an antidote to that.
Thank you so much, ladies, for joining me for a fabulous, awkward conversation. Mayim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I love awkward conversations.
We love having them with you.
Really glad that we could all discuss this today. Mayim, I'd love for you to be able to tell people where they can find you and resources and what
I'm
you're up to.
Very happy to be here. I love podcasting, and I have a podcast called Mayim Bialik's Breakdown. It's all things mental wellness, being. We started during COVID when there was a lot of isolation, anxiety, anticipatory anxiety, and a lot of grief. And we wanted to provide, my partner Jonathan and I, we wanted to provide a place where people can learn the basics of mental health and mental wellness, but expand it out into the intersection of science and spirituality and how that impacts our wellness. And I will say a lot of our guests struggle with substance abuse and have histories of having challenges, and there's a lot of really wonderful insight. So yeah, that's it.
It's a great podcast.
Yeah.
I do listening to it.
We like having you. And yeah, you
Thank
can
you.
find that at Bialik Breakdown or anywhere you get podcasts, Spotify. Yeah,
Great.
that's my universe right now.
I love that.
Awesome. That's amazing.
Yeah, talking about how to keep ourselves happy, whole, and healthy as
a
much as
journey.
we can. It is
It's a
a journey.
journey.
Thank you, ladies, for joining us today, and I hope you have enjoyed another episode of Awkward Conversations. You can find more information in our show notes, and join us next time. That's all for now. Tune in next week for more of Awkward Conversations Season 4. Now, the most important tool is a strong relationship that can create a bond and trust with your child. And yes, of course, your job is to protect them. But more importantly, by being present today and building that bond, you can give them the tools that they need to make the smart choices to protect themselves. And we will also keep reminding you, you do not need to be perfect. You just need to be present.
It's a new way of looking at ourselves and our children, which really moves away from parental control to connection. It isn't the child that needs to be fixed, because the child is not the one that's broken, but it's really the parental self that needs to be healed before we even dare to touch the beauty and mess up the child's essence. So we don't look at the child as something to be fixed or controlled or managed until we have looked at ourselves as parents.
Make sure to check out getsmartaboutdrugs.com. Parents, caregivers, you can find so many resources of great information there about how to talk to your kids and make these conversations a little less awkward. A huge thank you to the ELPS DAP, which is the largest all-volunteer nationwide drug awareness program, and also a huge thanks to the DEA for their outreach program and for making this possible.
The views, information, or opinions expressed during the Awkward Conversation series are solely those of the individuals, speakers, commentators, experts, and/or hosts involved, and do not necessarily reflect nor represent those of the production, associates, or broadcaster, or any of its employees. Production is not responsible and does not verify for accuracy any of the information contained in the series available for viewing. The primary purpose of this series is to educate and inform. This series does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services. This series is available for private, non-commercial use only. The production, broadcaster, or its channel cannot be held accountable for all or any views expressed during this program.